I'm currently co-founder and CEO of an AI startup called Fastager. So we support companies in their AI projects from data labeling all the way to building models. And we're also building our own solution for e-commerce, particularly creating infrastructure for e-commerce powered by AI for the African continent. My background is previously I worked for the German Development Corporation, managing a program that was called Make IT in Africa, that was supporting the startup ecosystem across the continent, particularly working with policy, working with entrepreneurs, running incubation programs. So got to work a lot with like the actual people on the ground who are in incubators and accelerators around the continent. I have a background in information systems from Japan, as well as economics and political science from Kenya.
Thank you so much. Kobia?
My name is Kobia Biko, and I, by nationality, I'm Namibian and Kenyan as well as South. I've got 3 countries where I'm a nationality, I'm a citizen. I've got a background in languages from Kenya. I've got background in law from United Kingdom, business from South Africa, as well as media studies from Malaysia. Altogether, those combinations have seen me go through the United Nations. I've been through universities as a resource keep person. But what I'm doing now at the moment, I'm the chief executive officer of a global group of companies based in South Africa, as well as Namibia and in Uganda. We're looking at to expanding to other parts of Africa, and we're very excited about the African continent free trade area. Otherwise, at the moment, all we're doing is looking at the way in which to enhance trade and business within the African continent. And I'm excited to be here as part of the panelists.
Thank you so much for the brief introductions. So getting into the discussion, today's discussion, like I said earlier, is going to be mainly centered on business incubators, right? Basically, what are business incubators? What have they done? So I'm going to start by opening with sort of a very small introduction, and I will ask the panelists to comment on some of the issues that I would have raised. So basically speaking, it almost feels like business incubators have become quite a very important part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. They are where entrepreneurs go for support and access of, and they also help with access of resources. So with support, I'm talking about training, mentorship, workspaces, business development, and also as outsource funding from venture capitals. So in some cases, you find government incubators and private incubators. So basically, I'm going to be asking the panelists to really speak more into this whole idea of business incubating. What is it about? What are business incubators? What are the benefits? How has that transformed the African entrepreneurship ecosystem? So I'm going to ask Mutebe, what's your view on business incubators? You said from your profile that you've worked with a business incubator before, and how is it like? Can you just share some insights in respect to that?
Yeah, so interestingly, I've been on most of the sites. So I've been an entrepreneur in different incubator programs. I've actually been part of like a VC company building program. And in my previous role with the German Development Corporation was actually managing a partnership with an incubation center here in Kenya called NILAB to run a program that ran for about 9 months, an incubation program for startups. So I think if we go back, since we're talking about tech, right? If we go back to where everybody keeps on talking about the cradle of tech in our current epoch, which is Silicon Valley, I think previously the incubators were universities. So if you just see how many startups have come out of the Stanford ecosystem or the Harvard ecosystem or the MIT ecosystem. And so ideally it was a place to bring, like-minded people, like talent, so very good talent, bring them together, give them all the resources that they need to build their enterprises, bring them mentors, people who have been in the industry, create those networks, and just create this tight space for networks. And you can see a good example of a very successful incubator like the Y Combinator as being a very good example of how, if you bring together all these things, in one location, like the entrepreneurs, the networks, the capital, the business advice, then it will be extremely good. And I think that's what now people for the longest time have been trying to replicate on the African continent. But particularly here, it's been more focused towards creation of them, using entrepreneurship to create employment, because of our demographic dividend that we have. In Africa, you have the AfriLab network, which is a connection of a lot of what they call now startup support organizations, entrepreneurship support. I think they call them ESOs now, entrepreneurship support organizations. I think they're extremely essential for any ecosystem. It's extremely important to have a space where entrepreneurs, because a lot of times entrepreneurs are taking huge risks. Even though they have the talent, the idea is like trying to make very calculated risks of trying to create something new, trying to create something that will bring a product, solve a problem in society, and by that, add value and also extract value to build something, right, that will create economic dividend as well. So in Kenya, I think we can really connect a lot of what has been happening to spaces such as the iHub, NILAB. Different universities have also been setting up their own incubation centers. A lot of organizations have also come in to support this, especially with the donor financing. We're having now angel investors on the continent. We hear the stories about almost everyone, whether it's Jeff Bezos, the parents giving him like $250,000, I think, dollars, to Mark Zuckerberg getting like $50,000 from Peter Thiel. We know if we can replicate this sort of space here, where we have local investors who know the market, putting in money, it would be amazing. And I think there's a really important report that I think has a lot of amazing insights by Endeavor. So Endeavor, the global organization that supports startups. So I think in 2015, came up with a report on ecosystems and what's important in those ecosystems. And, I think it brought very interesting highlights about how it's important to have local founders who have grown, teams to 100 plus people and scaled those enterprises, being the most influential people in an ecosystem. I think in Africa, you find that it's mostly, donor agencies and NGOs which have a lot of influence. And I think that has skewed, and that's why probably don't have as many unicorns, but it's something that, we need that push from the development space to push the ecosystem to a point where it can now also sustain itself. Because I think we were starting from, way farther along than places like Silicon Valley or Tel Aviv, London, New York, or Bangalore. Those are my 2 cents around
that. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you at a later stage and ask you in greater detail about, the donor agencies that you have just mentioned. But maybe if I could pose this question to Kobia. In my line of work, I tend to really work with SMEs, right? And there has been an outcry with regards to some of the barriers that SMEs tend to face, access to finance, technical capacity, and all these other things. So my question is, practically speaking, how does business incubation help that, number one? And number two, has it really been working? Because if you try to do some research, you realize that a lot of SMEs around Africa still face the same problems, in as much as we're still having this discussion on business incubation. So what could be the challenge? Is there a gap or something that is existing?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. As regards the SME component, it is a reality that the small to medium enterprises have been facing very big challenges. We ourselves started from a very minimal point. We were a small company. We grew to medium, company, and then we in the process of expanding and growth. What is key is that for the SMEs, for them to be able to make strides in the plane of enterprise, they will need support. business incubation is one of the areas where SMEs could look at in terms of, looking at getting more resources so that they can be able to expand. However, there are many challenges with SMEs, especially in the African context. The SMEs, these are small to medium enterprise. First and foremost is that the people who are owning the small enterprise and the medium enterprises may not have enough knowledge of, what it takes to run a business, because a business is an entity by itself, separate from the owners. This is a simple explanation about business. But as one starts their own business, they may be dealing with limited funds. It's a small enterprise. They have limited funds. They have a few personnel who would be willing to join them. There are so many challenges at the very beginning, including registering either to be a sole proprietor so that you can be recognized as a trading entity by either the banks or any other institution which would want to help you along the way. So with the small to medium enterprises, they would have wished they had more resources. Maybe they would have wished to have a mentor or maybe more knowledge in the way of helping them through the process of growing their business, and also to do the operations and the finances which come. It's not quite easily sustainable for a small to medium enterprises. Often, what they turn to is to turn to borrowing money at a higher exorbitant interest rates from people who are offering financial schemes for who are looking at great profits at a very short term. There and then they are not able to sustain a business getting loans from such sources, so they have to turn up and join an incubator, a business incubator, so that they could be able to get the resources as mentioned earlier on. We talked about stuff like access to bank loans, guarantee programs. They are being helped with the presentation skills and so much of knowledge so that they can be able to manage the small to medium enterprises to be something which is sustainable to reach beyond profitability and survival. But in an African context, so many small to medium enterprises die off because they don't know where to turn to, especially when they encounter challenges of financial flow, cash flow problems. So, as Mutembei has mentioned, something like angel investors or venture capital, these people are there, but they are willing to put their money where they can see a very good record of either a small startup or a medium, sustainable business which is moving forward. One of the things why we have business incubation is because most of the businesses which are welcome to join an incubation process, especially in the private sector, these are businesses which have got a very good prospect. For example, the idea is great. They have a great business plan. The idea is viable. And these people, maybe they have been trading for a while, and the business they want to launch their business now. They want to register to file and start doing, all these kind of things. They also want to be helped with management. They have a brilliant idea. Maybe they have started working on it. And in the private incubation process, the small to medium enterprises are encouraged because they look as if they are going to be something big in the future. No one is going to the private incubation of business to welcome businesses which do not have a lot of hope going forward. So coming back to the question which you asked me about SME in Africa, the SMEs are there to ensure that the African continent comes out of the poverty trap which it has had to endure for a long, long period of time. So business is the only way out. But at the same time, we have to increase the capacity of business incubation, business support, because these things are not available very much to the SMEs in Africa. So there is a lot of work to be done, especially in incubation of businesses in Africa as we move towards the African continent free trade area.
Thank you so much for that. You really raise interesting points. I'm going to ask you, Mutembei, since you're so much into the tech space. My question really is in relation to business incubation for tech startups, right? And I'm going to link it with what has been happening during the past 2 years. We have had COVID-19, and technology has the use of technology adoption has been on the rise. So can you say that there is actually an urgent need for business incubation at a greater, I would say, scale in Africa? What do you have to say about that? Because I heard of a lot of small businesses in countries like Uganda who had to reinvent their businesses, to adopt digitalization and get into the e-commerce space. So what then has to happen for those companies that were necessarily not tech companies, but are now trying to reinvent themselves because of the pandemic and, assessing the market and all?
So the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation. So there's this meme I've been seeing all over, because the memes are the new way that we communicate as humans, right? Which was saying that giving a company three choices, like asking who has been the agent of digital transformation in your company, right? And then CEO, CTO, COVID-19, and most probably for most people it's been COVID-19, right? Because most people are lax, whether it was the SME, which was lax with selling their wares on WhatsApp or on Facebook or on Instagram and all these other channels, or on on Jumia, on Kilimall, on Souk, or the different countries. I think what has happened is that the rest of the world, for example, e-commerce, I think, did revenues of about $5 trillion last year. Africa, interestingly, was only expected to get to about $45 billion, but it ended up growing by about 36.7% to about $85 billion, right? It was only suspected to have earlier, earlier statistics were saying that by 2020, before we knew COVID would impact us that much, that it would grow by about 16%. But you can see that everything doubled, even on the continent. People started realizing that the only way to move things, with all the curfews that we got, was by getting onto e-commerce, right? And that means we had to push for logistics to be better. We had to push for online engagement to be better. Stores. A lot of people have gotten a renewed focus on e-commerce working on the continent. So I absolutely think that tech is an enabler, right? Of course, you have to have the underlying businesses, right? But there needs to be a renewed emphasis on how to support businesses to transition into the digital transformation, whether it's actually, because now what you're finding that now the person who was delivering, or in Kenya we call them mama mboga, or like the lady at the market who you buy your greens from, right? You'd probably text her. You had her number, and you try to call her, or you communicate on WhatsApp or via text to know what she had or he had at that day, so that you can actually go and check on it in the market, because you aren't allowed to be out that often. Or you asked in Kenya, and I think Uganda and other places, we call them boda boda. You ask your boda boda person to go and collect your things from the market. So this sort of new business models where you're really engaging with tech are going to become more and more prevalent, because people have somehow gotten used. People thought that, as restrictions get low, people will go back to work, but we can see most people prefer working from home, right? Prefer having that freedom, and it's going to continue this way. You're seeing a lot of investments. I think this year has been the record highest of investments in tech startups on the African continent, which it just continues to increase, because now people are seeing the opportunities that tech has. Last year just showed like how much more there is. I think recently in Kenya you saw, I think it was called Kune. It got 1.1 million as a pre-seed dollars. Just showing how the space for cloud kitchens, and a number of other cloud kitchen companies are also coming up here. I think platforms such as Facebook, through their platforms like Instagram and WhatsApp increased also the engagement between consumers and sellers and businesses. You can see what's happening there's another startup actually just around announced a 2.5 million raise here in Kenya. They're called Mesozi Market Force, 360. So you can see that there's an increase push, and what we need is actually more people, more SMEs, not necessarily young people, but everybody, more SMEs being empowered by the technologies, and more people being, opened up to the possibilities of what they can build, whether it's replicating something that's in the West or just completely innovating on what is needed uniquely on the continent. So I think there's absolutely a new sort of frontier that has emerged on the continent. Whether you're talking about Nigeria has been having a lot of amazing investments. You're talking about fintech because the engine of commerce is fintech, is money, right? So how do we, now that we are having after the Africa free trade area, right? We need better ways of moving goods and moving money on the continent. You have companies such as Flutterwave and Paystack. Flutterwave becoming a unicorn, Paystack being acquired by Stripe. So everybody's saying that if you're going to have commerce on the continent, you need fintech and new technologies to enable buyers and sellers to move money, exchange money better. In Kenya, of course, you've had M-Pesa working for quite some time. You have a lot of people thinking about, you had Jack Dorsey of Twitter coming up onto the continent and, just seeing the opportunity for blockchain. You look at Codano in Ethiopia now being used in the school system. So the young people growing up in places like, Ethiopia will know how to, blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Nigeria is the biggest market in Africa for peer-to-peer, cryptocurrency exchanges, because of the fluctuation of the naira all the time. And so I think this is the time to really embrace all these different technologies because they're going to be the only way that, Africa is usually leapfrogging and using now this digital platform to increase commerce, to better people's lives, to bring new products, to spur innovation and to, increase the quality of life for people.
Oh, thank you so much for that. You raised an important issue, particularly with respect to the African Continental Free Trade Area, which I'm going to pose to Kobia, mainly asking this whole question that where exactly does business incubation fit in within the framework of the ACTA? Because our understanding is, on January 1st, 2021, the African Continental Free Trade Area became operational. And let's not talk about how there is not much conversation going on currently about it and how most people are not aware of any transactions going on. But basically, do you think that, enhanced or accelerated business incubation in Africa would actually help the continent realize most of those benefits that have been associated with an continental free trade area?
With as regards the way in which the African free trade area can be used as a leeway to increase upon a small and medium enterprise and other businesses joining an incubation, ecosystem. This depends mostly on how each specific state is going to roll out the passion which they will have around the trade bubble, which, as you've indicated, was launched the first day of this year, 2021. And what is required from there is a lot of things to happen. For example, countries will have to act upon themselves because I don't think at the moment the Secretariat has got enough money to offer every specific country in Africa. Therefore, every country which want to put enterprise at the forefront of rescuing their economy will be required at any given time to do some, budgeting so that they can set up incubation centers. They could be through the public-private partnership, or they could be within public by themselves, or it could be any other arrangement as long as they put the facility down and then at the same time have proper management to manage the incubation the business incubation center, and that management in turn is able to identify key businesses which are supposed to be at the leading on the assault of bring enterprise on board for everyone to see that the only way in which Africa can be able to get out of the situation it is to embrace trade. So the matter here of what I foresee at the moment, as you said, there's not much talk about African continent free trade area. Part of it is because of the situation of COVID, but we have had so many excuses anyway. But the thing is that government will have to reorder their trade priorities so that they can pay more attention to growing the small to medium enterprises, because these are the key to unlocking the economic, heaven, if you will, in terms of what is going to happen in the next couple of decades. When Africa is involved in internal trade, whereby, as someone said, if Africa is able to do trade among itself, it does not require any donation or aid from external sources. So that will be enough to bring in a region of about 100 billion US dollars benefits if African are trading between themselves. So government will have to step up, and the secretariat, which is at the African Union, will need to set out policies and give out these blueprints of what needs to be done. They need to work closely with the Minister of Trades. They need to work closely with those people involved in investment, in SPAS, in sponsoring small and medium enterprises. Of course, the FDI of big companies from Western Hemisphere or China, foreign direct investment is very much welcome, but we are not talking about that at the moment. We are talking about how Africa can be able to grow herself in terms of business and enterprise, such that she is able to introduce more people into the business, frontier. And this is where, as I said, government efforts, prioritizing the African continent free trade area, incorporating it within the budgetary procedures and the policy documents. This must be implemented by where there should be will. The will must be there. It must be followed by action. There should be people, because now you can see a lot of people are knowledgeable about businesses. So Mutebe will bear witness in that it's important that the government themselves take more lead in terms of guiding the businesses towards, incubation centers and other support mechanisms they may have so that the business can grow and that grow themselves out of poverty. I think that is where, it's not determined. It's not determined yet, but every, particularly public, every state in Africa must step up and see what it can do in terms of enhancing the small to medium enterprises, mostly through business incubation processes and any other opportunity which can, enhance the quality and, the growth of these small to medium enterprises.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. So maybe if I could bring back the conversation to the time, Teme, when you spoke about donor agencies that are, incubating businesses. I'm going to ask, what can governments do to make sure that they also have a stick in the game and start incubating businesses, or in a way fund business incubators? I was reading somewhere where I was realizing that there was a time that the US government, for instance, had an incubation project that it was funding, mainly for clean energy. It was called the National Incubator Initiative of Clean Energy, which was basically trying to, enhance incubation within the tech space. And I don't think governments are really involved in doing that, especially in this part of Africa where I stay. I'm not sure about East Africa. And then I also realized that the Malaysian government was also trying to incubate a lot of startup businesses, particularly during the COVID period in respect of e-commerce and everything. So what do you think governments have to do? Because it almost feels like most of these incubators that are currently there are not so much involved with African governments. And if governments are going to be funding or some of these research institutes or whatever, what are the benefits of having the government actually being involved in this whole process?
Yeah. So the thing is, government always has a role, right? And the thing is, government is really powerful because it can have a role in creating a very good regulatory environment. So having good legislation. We have things such as the Startup Act, part of initiatives such as Smart Africa, which is part of the AU. You have countries like Tunisia, Kenya, a couple of other countries like Rwanda. I mean, coming up with startup acts in the as legislation where trying to because when you're trying to build a company and you're finding you're being taxed the same way that a multinational, in fact, if a multinational will probably be taxed less because they have good lawyers to play around with things. I think legislation is one very important factor, right? If we can find ways that the different governments can, reduce tax or even just a zero rate, the business of a startup until they reach a certain maturity point, and then start taxing them, or zero rate certain inputs that are coming in. We know that in Kenya, one of the things that they zero rated was like motherboards, PCBs for building things like IoT, equipment. I think those are the things that's one of the ways government can work. I do know that government also supported, incubator programs such as the Nile Lab, and putting in helping, getting them to run certain programs on behalf of the government. The Ministry for ICT in Kenya has actually done quite a bit in setting up, innovation hubs in different constituencies or in the country, which have connection to the internet. I think there's what government can do, but a lot of times government, I would say, the biggest thing that they can do is create an environment where private actors and private investment can come in and work. So even if you look at, for example, the US, I think there was a time they mentioned that if you look at the unicorns or the $100 million revenue plus companies, these startups in the US, about 50% of them, it's immigrants, right? So allowing talent to move freely on the continent, and as well also allowing talent from outside to come in and mix with the local talent pool and build innovations. We end up being more like South Africa or Israel, who build technology for the rest of the world, and that really adds to the economy. If you look at Africa right now, there's the AfriLab network. They work sometimes closely with the AU, and they really push the AU to think more innovatively as to how incubators that are supported either from the government or other agencies. In Kenya, you have the Kenya Industrial Entrepreneurship Project by the World Bank, that's a loan to the Kenya government, right? That's taxpayer money that is eventually going to pay this back, now being used to help increase capacity of incubators in Kenya, right? And having more of that program, because that's a government program, right? That it's borrowed that money to support its ecosystem. And if we can have more of that, that's fantastic. You build the capacity for these private actors to create more impact, build, enable these SMEs to grow into large, proper businesses. And then also, I think I'd like to mention that SMEs are really important for any economy, but I think startups are also really important. And the idea of a startup is it's supposed to become a highly scalable, $100 million plus revenue, high valuation business, right? That's the idea of what a startup is supposed to be. And I think that's why, in tech, you're having all these incubators, VC, company creation programs and all this coming in. And the idea is those ones need quite a lot of money, because the idea is that at the beginning, and I think that's a concept a lot of government sometimes, would need to connect to, because they've been focusing so much on the larger economy of SMEs. But, the idea of focusing on startups is that they will take in a lot of money before they're making profit. But the idea is that in 10 years, 15 years, they are like Apple today. It's a $2.1 trillion company. That's bigger than most economies, bigger than the African economy, right? just one company. And if we could have one of such companies paying taxes on the continent, yeah, which is homegrown, that's doubling our GDP as the African continent. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done, government and other partners, right? Because we're in a globalized environment. You need capital flowing in from different places, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US. We should be open to that. All very, you look at Shenzhen, it grew because a lot of people came in from all over the world. Silicon Valley, the same. As I said before, 50% of those big companies were founded, or in the founding team was someone, an immigrant to the US, right? Or you talk about London or everybody else. So we need a mixture of, talent, diverse players, whether it's, international NGOs or governments. Government has a big part to play because they control legislation and policy, and also to protect the businesses that are built in their environment. Because even in the US, they have a lot of legislation that ensures that capital stays in the country, right? And we should also do that.
Thank you so much for that. Kobe, I wanted to ask, since you are the lawyer in the house, Mutembe mentioned something that's very important. He spoke about the role of government in formulating policy and regulations. And I would love if you'd speak about that from a legal perspective, from a lawyer's perspective. You would realize that in the financial markets, especially in developed countries, we now have what they're calling regulatory sandboxes, right? Which are basically meant to provide an environment for startups in the fintech space to grow without really stifling development. So I'm really going to can you just tell us what you think has to be done from a regulatory perspective, the importance of regulation, and how it fits in within this whole idea of business incubation in Africa? I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that Christine is on the line, and I have an indication that Christine has a question. So over to you, Christine.
Thanks, Chido, and it's quite an interesting conversation. And I thought from what Mutembe mentioned on making sure that the funds remain in Africa, like looking at, for instance, if Amazon or, like one of these digital and e-commerce platforms actually paid tax, or if there was a way to tap into some of the income that's coming from Africa, that would be very helpful. And then I thought, what would be some ideas that you would have about making sure that some of these funds remain within the African continent? So if you have any thoughts or indications around that, I think it would be interesting to hear.
Over to Mutembe, yes.
Oh, okay. I think so. There's the balance between attracting foreign direct investment and creating a good enough environment that people will be like, okay, we have to set up, in Africa, we have to set up in these countries, and it's a good play. You can see the way the EU has really struggled to ensure that some of the of the money from the tech companies stays also in the countries. But I think what I was actually talking about is less about the big tech giants, the FANGs and the rest coming to the continent. More of what I was saying is that we need to create environments for companies such as Facebook or Amazon to emerge from the African continent. We need to make it that the companies such as Fastager, for example, right, is able to emerge strongly from here and is able to become a global company, right? And that even though we're going to be receiving capital from other parts of the world, a large part of our revenues and the benefits from our revenues can also be on the continent. But that can only work if there are enough incentives to get companies to stay on the continent, right? Because you'll find that the UAE, the US, the UK, especially now after Brexit, a lot of people are actually trying to get companies, innovative companies built in Africa, to move to those countries, and they are giving very attractive conditions and environments for that. Less tax, more resources closer to, higher talent. What can African governments do to retain talent? Because a lot of talent is leaving, right? Because now talent is very democratized, right? You can see what companies such as Andela and others are doing, right? It's talent for Africa working for countries abroad. But then you can also see on the flip side what companies such as Microsoft are doing. They're moving their development centers onto the African continent, like in Nairobi. So the talent is definitely there. We need to just create more incentives for people to want to build their companies on the continent and to stay on the continent because the incentives are better than anywhere else in the world. So that's what I was mostly alluding to, right? You because if someone builds their company from the US and you want to tax them like crazy here, it's their innovation, it's their creation of value, right? So it's very hard to say that, hey, we're going to tax you as much as possible. They're just going to say, okay, fine, we're going to leave that market and go somewhere else that is better for us. And what we need to build is our own homegrown, tech giants, right? And give them enough of a good environment for them to flourish, right? So that, they can build up more talent, because that's what always happens to everybody else, right? You have PayPal, it comes up with the PayPal mafia. You have Facebook, you have all the people who made money out of it. Facebook going and opening other companies. In India, you have the same situation with Snapdeal or Flipkart. All the people who built companies there, who worked in the foundation of those companies, went on to build other unicorns. And this is the same thing we need to do here, right? We need to create such a good environment for business to come. One comes up, it seeds the next and the next and the next and the next. Yeah, we need to, do things such as giving investors incentives. We tell an investor, there's a lot of money flowing around in our economies. We know that, right? Sometimes we know it with certain people, right? We need to give them incentive that government says, instead of you putting money into real estate, if you put it in a startup and the startup goes bust, let's say, then you get your money back in tax rebates, for example, right? This happens, I think, in the US. Or you say something like, if you invest in startups, right, then what we'll do is that when you're getting your dividends, or when you're getting your or the amount that you invest can be given a tax incentive. You can reduce your tax based on declaring that you invested in a startup, right? And that can actually reduce your tax. And this kind of incentives will make local investors who have tons of money, from either starting it abroad or putting up real estate and creating real estate bubbles in the different countries.
Quite a good response. Thank you for that. Wow. Yeah, I'm actually a tax expert, so it's very interesting when I hear these ideas. And just what you said is what China does, like for startups, when you're getting your money out, if you invest in a certain kind of high-tech startup, then you get certain benefits when you're repatriating your dividends out. So quite interesting. Chido, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I feel like we're running out of time. I'm so much grateful for this conversation. Mutembe, thanks for being here. You have said quite a lot. Unfortunately, we have lost Kobe, but I feel like if we really pay much attention to some of the issues that you're raising in this conversation, we could possibly have our own Silicon Valley. So maybe before I wrap up this conversation, I just wanted you to say your final thoughts. If somebody is going to listen to this from, 5 minutes before the discussion ends, what are they going to take away from it? Anything that you want to put out there?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm not that good in these one-liners. I remember watching movies like Rambo and those, or movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger. They're very good at those amazing one-liners. I don't know how. Just probably some things that. Of course, there's all the famous things that you hear people from Silicon Valley saying. Particularly Peter Thiel. Saying that we should be focusing on, building 0 to 1 companies. Like proper innovation. And but I think one of the most important things that I probably like to say, which I've learned in the last couple of years, is we shouldn't be satisfied with building a company that is, it's okay to build a company that is going to be a lifestyle company, that's okay. It might even be better than trying to build a big startup and failing. But something that we need to work on the African continent is to change the culture towards failure when someone has been ambitious enough to try something big. We should actually congratulate those people. Right? We should give them as much support as we can. We should have a more trust-based, space. I know we keep on talking about Ubuntu and everything, but it doesn't seem to translate to capital. It's like it was something. It's nice for us to say most of the time, but it's an old story for us, right? But we need to turn this also into something that can, an Ubuntu that builds companies and creates value on the continent. And we need to also think in terms of global companies. Like you're building a company out of Zimbabwe or Kenya, or I've met, Zimbabweans amazingly smart. I don't know how you guys figured this out, but I don't know. You guys, your talent is always crazily amazing. We should build environments where, Zimbabwean talent can move to Kenya, can move to Nigeria, Nigerian talent can move around the continent, and we all build world-class companies which can compete with any company coming out of the UK, China, and that requires a ton of hard work, and that's where we need to focus. To a large extent, we need to, yes, remember that there are some challenges that have faced our continent, but from now on, it's us to, sort out how to move forward and build, global companies, companies that, you start it here, it will launch in the US, it will launch in somewhere else, and with the internet, you can definitely do that. You can solve problems here, and you can partner with a larger, like what Paystack did with Stripe. We can build global companies, and I think that's the number one mindset. I think everyone should have on the continent.
Wow, that was amazing. It almost feels like you have summarized most of the discussions that we've been having on this platform. And I really do agree with you that there's so much more that can be done, and everything that has to be done is within. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to have another discussion with you where you tell us again about technology and how to actually approach this whole concept from a practical perspective, and not just how we write about it in books and everything. So thank you guys for listening and tuning in. If you've got further questions, please do get in touch with us on our various platforms. And again, we always value your feedback. But for tonight, we are done, and goodbye.